This is episode 127 of Stand Up. Joining me today for part 2 of my conversation with him, cult expert Stephen Hassan. We talk about Trump, cult, and much, much more. Then I welcome to the show the great Professor Eric Segall to talk about the landmark decisions at the Supreme Court today. And finally, activist and host of SiriusXM Progress, Michelangelo Signorile. Michelangelo Signorile will join me as well. I'm Pete Dominic. Time to stand up with me right now. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me and listening to today's episode of the podcast. 3 great experts, smart folks joining me on the show today. Everybody loved the first time Stephen Hassan was on, and I've talked to him 2 more times. Today, part 2, tomorrow, part 3 of my conversation with him, which I hope is ongoing. That's what I like to do. I like to introduce you to these experts, build a relationship and a trust and a credibility, and continue that conversation, which is exactly what I did with freedomofmind.com's Stephen Hassan. And I just want to say, first of all, I've been getting a lot of emails from listeners describing why they like the show or why they've liked it over the years or me. And recently I got something from a listener, I think it was last night, about how he's been listening since I used to talk about think for yourself, look everything up. And I realized how that idea of thinking for yourself and look everything up and don't use the labels, I'm not sure that that's weathered that well, because you can basically find anything that you want these days on the internet. But I do appreciate the fact that you trust me as much as you can trust someone in media to bring you is close to the truth? What is that? I mean, people have different truths. There are alternative facts, but I try to find the best experts I can find and have them right here on the show, which is daily. So I will keep doing that 2 or 3 or more every day, and I hope that you will continue to keep supporting this show and telling your friends about it. Get a paid subscription right now if you haven't, because I'm doing my best to bring you the smartest, most articulate, passionate, credible, experienced people each and every day, and I greatly appreciate all of your support along that. So let's get right to it, shall we? Because lots to talk about today. The Supreme Court ruled Monday that a landmark civil rights law protects gay, lesbian, and transgender people from discrimination in employment. A resounding victory for LGBT rights from what it can only be described as a conservative majority court. 6-3. An employer who fires an individual for being a homosexual or transgender fires that person for traits or actions it would not have questioned in members of a different sex. Sex plays a necessary and indisguisable role in the decision, exactly what Title VII forbids. That quote came from Justice Neil Gorsuch. And what do you think of that? Big news from the court on that, as well as another decision that came down today on gun and gun rights. The fact that the court took this up, or didn't take it up, I should say. I talk about both these with Eric Segall, but here is Gabrielle Gifford's organization tweeting, the Supreme Court just declined to hear 10 Second Amendment cases leaving in place restrictions on assault weapons, concealed carry licensing, and other life-saving gun laws nationwide. This is a win for public safety and a loss for the NRA. So how about that? Very important cases. There's more as well on sanctuary cities and more. So let's get to the conversation, because Eric Segall's got a lot to say about that, as does Michelangelo Signorile. But my first guest today is Stephen Hassan, who is a fascinating guy. I love talking to him. He's written several books, and he's on Twitter at Cult Expert. Freedomofmind.com is his website. He is one of the leading experts on cults and undue influence, a mental health professional, author, teacher. He helps people, their family members, deal with those of you who have lost family members to these kind of conspiracy theories and QAnons. He explains all of this stuff, has tremendous experience, and he himself was in a cult as a young man, so he's got more credibility than anybody you can imagine. And I've talked to him 3 times now. Today is part 2 of our conversation. And you can listen to part 1 of our conversation back in episode 113, and then I'll bring you part 3 tomorrow. I love talking to this guy. I got rave reviews on our first conversation. Really good guy, really smart guy, thoughtful, science-based. Here he is. Conversation number 2. Number 3 will air tomorrow. I'll post it. Stephen Hassan, freedomofmind.com right now. So, as promised, he is back. huge hit the first time. Stephen, thank you for joining me again. My wife said, there's so many good questions you didn't ask him, so I'm so glad that you're back. Stephen Hassan, everybody.
I really enjoyed our conversation, and I look forward to today.
There's a lot that I want to talk with you about, of course, but I wanted to start specifically on something I think it's really important that everybody know. It's that the cult Falun Gong is involved with and supports and created, I think, the, quote, media outlet, the Epoch Times. There's been some very good reporting on this, but I wanted to start with that because I think it's the most important thing that listeners know about the Epoch Times, or Epoch, EPOCH. Their advertisements are everywhere, especially on Facebook and YouTube, and it's very slickly done. Where do we start on this very important issue?
Yeah, and they have newspapers out in all over. So Li Hongzhi is the cult leader who's the perfect master, who believes in aliens and UFOs, and that his organization has the solution to all of humanity's problems and issues, just like my former cult leader, Sun Myung Moon, claimed to be the greatest spiritual leader in human history, and lots of other, conspiracies. But this is a group that I actually went to some of their recruitment meetings when they first showed up in the United States, and I wanted to know, are they legit or not? And I quickly realized when I started asking very pointed questions that they were not legitimate, because if a group is legitimate, they will answer your questions transparently, honestly, give you facts to back up their claims. And if they're not, they turn it around on you as it's your problem that you're asking questions, right? Or they deflect, or they project, or they do any number of other mind control-ish type of strategies. I guess I want to plug a YouTube video by J.J. McCullough that I just watched that was really well done, very well researched on this.
Of the Washington Post.
I believe he writes for the Washington Post. Yes, J.J. McCullough. Okay. And the thing about the Cult of Trump book, which I wrote.
I'll share that video in the show notes. Excuse me.
October. I actually regret I didn't spend time talking about them because I didn't realize how important they were to his election and to the campaigning. I also didn't talk about Scientology explicitly. And I didn't talk about the Moonies and their gun factory in Pennsylvania and all these cults that are supporting the cult of Trump and have their true believer followers mindlessly doing whatever their leaders tell them to do.
Well, we need to unpack all that and why it's happening. And let's use the examples that we're seeing right now with today's authoritarians. This is a new segment I like to call Today's Authoritarians. So crazy. How many, the rise of autocracy, authoritarianism, there's a number of different words. They all mean a little bit different. Oligarchy, plutocracy. But I like authoritarian the best because we see, I will know, good, you would know. We see Bolsonaro in Brazil. We see, is it Modi in India? We see Putin in Russia. And the gentleman leading Hungary, that fucking monster, Orban,
Netanyahu.
Netanyahu in Israel. You're considering?
He's in the Cult of Trump book.
Well, you are an anti-Semite.
I am a Jew.
But you're a self-hating Jew for criticizing Netanyahu.
No, I love Judaism. In fact, when I was in the Moon cult, I was told that the Holocaust was necessary because the Jews didn't accept Jesus, and I fasted for Nixon during the Watergate thing because God wanted Nixon to be president. No, and then I got deprogrammed and I realized, wait a minute, I got to go back to my roots and rediscover what are my values and what is my base. And I believe in Judaism that loves justice and compassion and charity and honesty and integrity and not persecution and oppression and all the things that I grew up, with Passover celebrating liberation from Pharaoh. I'm not into supporting pharaohs around the world. Back to your theme of authoritarian.
Yeah, and let's get on that. But of course, just one caveat there. To be critical of Israeli foreign, domestic policy or people is not to be anti-Semitic. We are critical all day of American foreign and domestic policy. Doesn't mean we are necessarily anti-American, whatever. It's anyway.
No, it's very important distinction,
Yeah.
and it's important for people to understand that it is a propaganda disinformation technique to label black and white, all or nothing. And if you're for democracy and treating Israeli Arabs and Israeli Muslims as equals, is the fundamentals of what I believe the Jewish state is supposed to be about. So I and my temple, I belong to a very progressive temple in Brookline, Massachusetts, with a female rabbi. Ooh, women worshiping at the Wailing Wall. Ooh, horrible for Judaism. No, Judaism has evolved over centuries, and we got to keep evolving. And I'm pushing my rabbi to let us do Zoom services on Shabbat because it's an anti-technology, temple. But I think the board is going to finally realize.
I want to know the outcome of that and how it can be replicated at other synagogues across the country. All right, so let me ask you though, tying this all in, authoritarians. You mentioned before we started talking, and this is very important, that there's always been this propaganda campaign. It started with American fossil fuel companies, is my understanding, to create a denialism of the science that was emerging, that greenhouse gases warm the planet and fossil fuels were the main reason.
Didn't the tobacco industry create a disinformation campaign that smoking caused cancer?
Yes, but you interrupt with something that doesn't illustrate the point, because I don't think we ever had a tobacco state trying to infiltrate and use this propaganda. So it starts with Exxon and Mobil and the American fossil fuel companies. But today's authoritarians, some of them at least, are petrol states. Their main source of money comes from oil. And so what you're saying is the authoritarian, like Putin, is now promoting the propaganda, the anti-science propaganda, the anti-climate change science, to be specific, propaganda, as a result, and that's different from a company doing it. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's very true. And but there's been state propagandizing by the U.S. against other elected democracies that have not been aligned.
Yeah, the entire Republican Party, as a matter of fact, and
the Chinese government is authoritarian, and now this is the other topical thing, is they're taking over Hong Kong and destroying.
Yes, it's terrifying and upsetting.
It's very upsetting. And what I said, going back to Falun Gong, what I said originally,
with our endorsement.
What I said about Falun Gong is it's a cult, but the Chinese government's a cult. The Chinese government's a political cult. This is a Eastern energy cult, a Qigong type of cult, but two cults it's not one is good and one is bad. It's both are bad in the sense that they're undermining human rights and freedom of mind.
And I think probably most importantly, undermining the settled science on an issue.
Right. So I don't know if we said this the last interview, Pete, but the whole notion that we live in a post-truth world is BS. Truth is still there. It's just there's propaganda that you create your own reality. Right. And whatever you believe is real. That's straight out of Hubbard and Scientology, by the way, and The Secret, and all these prosperity ministers who say just wish it and pray it and God will deliver it. And by the way, that's what Donald Trump was born into, was that mindset, by the way. I say, no, facts matter, science matter, experts actually know what they're talking about if they're real experts. And the beauty of the scientific method is it doesn't assume we know the truth. It assumes we don't, and that we're open to changing our theories if there's proof that demonstrates there's a better theory or a better story.
Which is the sign of the best expert, those who are willing and have over and over,
exactly
evolved as new information comes through. Now, you mentioned the depth of expertise, and there's been a lot written about that, which is very important. But you understand the psychology behind that and why it's happening. And we were also talking about, before I hit record, the CDC and what has happened there, new reporting on what's going on with what has always been kind of the gold standard in the world, and certainly in America, and a highly respected American institution that wasn't that controversial, is my understanding. So what is happening at the CDC, and how does this tie into the authoritarian propaganda efforts and, as you call them, psychological warfare?
Yeah. So when I was researching the cult of Trump, I learned of a approach called fourth generation warfare. If you look it up, William S. Lind wrote about it in the 80s. He was a military strategist. He later paired up with Paul Weyrich of the Christian Right. But essentially, instead of PSYOP, psychological warfare, to convert the other side to your point of view, it's really to undermine people's sense of truth, of belief in a leader, belief in an institution. So the strategy is to not only create dissonance and conflict between different factions within a democracy, but it's also to literally, and Trump and Pence have demonstrated this from the beginning, why put someone in the head of education who doesn't believe in education? Why put someone in charge of the EPA who doesn't believe in the EPA's mission? Why have a CDC that's actually concerned about data about diseases? It's to make people confused, overwhelmed, disoriented, hopeless, so that they'll listen to the authoritarian voice that says, trust me, I know what I'm doing. We got this.
Well, he doesn't know what he's doing. And specifically, he recently said, I want to, just make this a point for you to illustrate the ideas behind. I don't know if he really knew. I don't know how much Trump knows about his behaviors and the impacts they have. I don't think
he's following a lot of bad advice from people with agendas.
Yeah, but he said, I think it was last week, and I can't stop thinking about this. And now, of course, I don't have the exact quote, but he basically said, if we didn't have so many tests, we wouldn't have so many cases. Maybe we should. Are you familiar with that? I'm paraphrasing it.
Absolutely. No, it's in a sense, it's about denial of reality.
But it's denial of.
We take the homeless and move them off the streets, then we don't have a homeless problem anymore. It's that same mentality, except there are people who are homeless.
Yeah, but what is that technique about? I mean, he can just say anything, and the follower does not challenge it. I'm talking about the cult leader in this case.
I'm afraid to say that I was in that mindset when I was a Moonie, that whatever the master said, I was trained that he knows better. I mean, when I read Scott Adams' book, Win Bigly or something, it was like, Trump is a master. He's doing fourth dimension, chess that we know later, 4 moves later, why he was doing something. No, not. This is a very, very dysfunctional, malignant narcissist with the same profile as Jim Jones and Charles Manson and Sun Myung Moon and L. Ron Hubbard. And he's got very authoritarian, wealthy, powerful people who want to make money. First, they want to have power, they want to have money, and they want to have sex. Those are the 3 universals with cult leaders. And going back to like QAnon and the whole conspiracy theory thing, they actually had bought the Russian propaganda that Trump's going to end trafficking, even though Putin's one of the biggest sex traffickers in the world, and Trump is one of the biggest users of sex trafficking in the world. I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, but from all the people that I've talked with, including a physician who Trump personally asked, do you know how to get rid of antibiotic-resistant gonorrhea? 20 years ago.
You're saying that he probably, you're insinuating that he had sex with a lot of prostitutes or...
And it's the Russian, the Soviet Union, and then the Putin playbook of compromat with any dignitary, any business person, setting them up in hotels with recording machines with beautiful women to do the most deviant sex possible. So they have. You think
they've got videos on him?
100%.
Why do you? What informs you of that?
All of the Russian experts I've interviewed. I asked them in researching the book because I don't want to go out on a limb, but they're like, "Are you kidding? This is standard operating procedure for the intelligence services of Russia for decades."
So
women serve their country on their back. It's like a motto, is what they've told me.
What would explain his malfeasance to Putin is that he's got these videos on him. Other people say that, he owes the Russian government money and so on, but it's...
Well, that's the Russian experts say that it was really the Russian mafia that bailed him out of the casinos and all the real estate deals. They were paying extraordinarily over.
Why?
Just to launder money and to get deeper involved with them.
I am going to ask what I think some people might be thinking, but I know you're going to have a great answer. Why would you trust these Russian experts? People might say, well, they're lying to you as well, or they're making shit up as well. But you are a guy who would not fall for such.
So David K. Johnston, who's been following and writing about Trump longer than almost everybody, he's researched it and written about it in his books. But I've talked with many Russian experts, some that I would just be on the airplane with, and we'd get to chatting. And, oh, by the way, I was stationed in Russia, on intelligence. Mind if I ask you a question? And it would... And many of these people have written books, but they are very careful about what they say publicly because they don't want to get in trouble with their former bosses, or they don't want to get harassed or assassinated.
Let me switch gears and ask you about another cult and movement that has had tremendous influence in our country over the years, and that is the family. It's this Christian right group of... you can explain it far better than I can. The C Street House. There was originally a book that Jeff Charlotte wrote about it, which is amazing. He's an investigative journalist. And then a popular Netflix, I think, which a lot of my listeners have asked me, what do I think of it? And I haven't seen it. And I have you now. So
you got to watch it.
Yeah, it sounds terrifying. So what do we need to know?
Well, so Michael Pence was recruited into the family by Chuck Colson.
The current vice president, Mike. Nobody ever calls him Michael.
The vice president, Michael Pence, was recruited into the cult called The Family. By the way, my former cult was called The Family. The Children of God was called The Family. Manson's group was called The Family. But this is a particular group that started the National Prayer Breakfast 80 years ago. And it was formed in the height of the Cold War that we have to stop these atheist commies. And so we're going to do authoritarianism for Jesus, essentially, if I'm going to summarize the theme. And the thing about them is they'll recruit Democrats, Republicans, atheists, dictators, wealthy business people. Why? Because they have an agenda. And that agenda is really to undercut the separation of church and state, to undercut women's right for health, for gay rights, for rights of atheists to say, I don't want to have to be forced to pray, to God or swear to God on a Bible, etc. So they have this theocratic, dominionist Christian nationalism agenda that is really contrary to the founding fathers and the Constitution, but they try to spin it and say, no, we were really an American country, a Christian nation when we were founded. And the founders specifically said, warning, we don't want to be like England, we don't want an imperial president. We need checks and balances, which another thing Trump and his administration has been systematically dismantling and ignoring rule of law.
Yeah, forget about Congress and oversight. They're firing inspectors general every day. It's insane. Go ahead.
And unfortunately, we've been operating under the assumption, which I think is incorrect, that he was honestly elected president of the United States, ignoring all of the details of all of the intelligence, all 17, that said Russia hacked the election. And if just to convince people not to vote, or convincing people that Hillary was, running a trafficking ring in the basement of a pizza place that doesn't have a basement. And we really need to make sure that our election, we are able to vote, and we can count on him doing every dirty trick possible, because he's going to go to jail.
Well,
if he's not reelected, he knows it.
Going back to the family, how influential are they today, and how can we see their influence? Obviously, Mike Pence being the vice president matters, but Trump is an authoritarian.
I honestly don't know. Jeff Charlotte kind of said, "I've done the family, no more. I'm moving on."
Yeah.
And so, and I'm not aware of anyone who's picked up that baton, but they absolutely should. Doug Coe was the main leader for decades. He passed away a few years ago. I don't know who's taken over. But the documentary, or the docuseries, I should say, on Netflix will show you the depth and the manipulation, and how they were recruiting young people into feeder cells, and then using them to influence congressmen and senators. And I need to say, when I was in the Moonies in 1974, and I actually have Moon's speeches printed by the cult itself called Master Speaks, where he's saying, we're going to infiltrate the government. We're going to have 3 people in every congressman and senator's office. Democracy is satanic, and we need a theocracy to rule the world. And I was promoted as an American leader. I had no power, but I had status. And one of my superiors was like, when we take over the world, you should think what country you want to run, Steve. I was 21 years old. 21 years old. What country do you want to run? I'm going, maybe Australia. I'd have my own continent. And I was like, I was a nerd. I was writing poetry, reading books. I had zero political aspirations. I didn't want to go into my father's hardware business because I didn't like business. I was like an artist, was my self-concept. But there I am being told I need to rule the world.
Wow. I wanted to ask you, and I want to talk for hours about this because I've recently got very interested in it. And you mentioned earlier prosperity ministers, and I would add to them some of these, quote, motivational entrepreneur YouTubers. I would even add for sure, and want to know what you think about this organization called Landmark. There's a lot to say about them. And we recently lost one of our closest friends, in my opinion, someone we were very close with, to this Landmark organization.
Landmark Forum used to be Est. Werner Erhard, who was really Jack Rosenberg, used to be a Scientologist. The best book on the subject is by Stephen Pressman called Outrageous Betrayal. There was a 60-minute special on Werner Erhard that featured one of his disciples who choked his wife till she was blue in front of him and his entire family to please Werner, who claimed to be Source with a capital S. But that's just a short little clip about that particular thing.
I appreciate that background. But right now, I mean, this organization is still very Landmark, that it's now the most recent name or iteration. It's everywhere and extremely influential is my impression.
Well, if you take past the transformational experience, what they're doing is a highly structured bite model, which is my model of mind control, behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control, to break people down and build them up in their image. And they basically, their actual beliefs are, you are God and you create your own reality. There's no such thing as an accident or a victim. And that if you work and recruit all of your family and friends into them, you'll save humanity. Like those are the basic gists. So if you have diabetes, Pete, and you need to take insulin, why did you need to create that for yourself? And they actually believe you don't need to take insulin. At least one person that I know personally was told this decades ago, that she created this disease to get her father's attention.
They say things like that if you were ever sexually assaulted, even as a child, somehow it was your fault?
Yeah, because there's no such thing as an accident, and you're creating your reality because you are really God. You have that kind of, they have that mindset, but that's what Hubbard believed.
L. Ron Hubbard, the creator of Scientology.
Extension of magical thinking. And I want to just take a minute, because I know we don't have a lot of time, but go back in my book to Edward Bernays, who wrote the book Propaganda in 1928. He was Freud's nephew, and he was the first person to connect psychology and marketing and psychology and business. He did the first presidential campaign. He was hired by the tobacco industry to get women to smoke cigarettes. Goebbels tried to hire him, but to his credit, he said no. But the whole Nazi propaganda thing is based on his work. And what we see over the decades is an evolution of our knowledge of how the mind works, how to manipulate people, how to get people to want products that they don't need and maybe don't even want. And my position as a former cult member and a mental health professional is, hey, everybody, stop thinking you're too smart to be manipulated and start learning what the techniques are so you can protect yourself, your family, and your loved ones, and our country and the world's democracies. Because if everybody doesn't get it, if they don't understand how they can be manipulated and the difference between facts and propaganda, we're in deep trouble.
All right. We have about 7 minutes left, and I want to ask my wife's questions, or else I'll be in trouble. I know you have great answers for these. Are you ready?
I am married for 22 years, and I think answering your wife's questions is a very smart move.
Why does Pete not shower every day? Sorry. Oh, that was not for you. Oops. Here's her questions. The enticing things about being in a cult or radical group, belonging, having a cause, purpose, meaning, how do you substitute that need in a healthy way?
Well, I think the more important thing is realizing that destructive cults deceptively recruit people into believing that by getting involved with them, they're going to improve themselves or improve the world. So once they're in that mindset, they are then programmed with fears, phobias, taught thought stopping, and other techniques to keep them in that bubble. So for me, the issue is teaching them about how mind control works, how it works in other cults, not theirs, because it'll get past their defensiveness as a believer. And then helping them see there are actually people who are improving themselves and contributing to the world in substantive ways, and role modeling that and introducing them to former members who've left the rabbit hole or left the cult and are saying, hey, right, it's good out here. I was only in 2.5 years, but I've been out 44 years. Married, I got a kid, I like to scuba dive, I play basketball, I belong to a temple, I'm enjoying my life, and I'm learning and I'm growing, and it's good out here. Come on, join us.
Here's another question of hers. Why are some people more susceptible? Is there a clear answer, several clear answers? Is it the timing in someone's life? Can someone like me...
The biggest vulnerability is ignorance about the techniques. It's like somebody needed to tell you at some point, Pete, you never give your credit card number to a stranger on the phone. No matter how good the story, never, ever give a credit. You need to get that education that cults exist and liars exist, etc. But the biggest thing that I've seen in my practice is what's called situational vulnerabilities or life cycle events like death of a loved one, illness, graduation, losing a job, divorce, moving to a new city, state, or country. Things that throw you off balance, things that make you question existentially, who am I and what is the meaning of life and what am I supposed to do with it? So that's the biggest vulnerability. I can say that, if you were sexually abused as a kid and you were told never to tell anybody, and you get sucked into a free personality test of Scientology, and then they want to offer you an auditing thing and they get you to share that you were molested, it's a huge relief to actually, say the truth. But now you're investing your personal knowledge into a cult group that's going to keep exploiting that information forever.
One of the things that I've found in arguing with people who I find to be conspiracy theorists, and maybe we can call them members of a cult of somehow, I don't know how we delineate necessarily if they don't go to meetings or it completely change their life and sell their family.
It's all online now, Pete. Even
right.
Before COVID, it's moved online to radicalization online and recruitment online.
We talked a little bit about that in part one, but there's a lot more to be said about that. But my question is, I often hear these folks that buy into a lot of this bullshit say, I don't need to debate it. You're the one that's not listening. You're the one that's not a critical thinker. I don't need to defend this. I know it's right. I hate that, Stephen, because I love a good debate on policy, on ideology, and I will often lose that debate if someone has had it many times before, knows a lot more than me. But for someone to say, I don't need to defend something that sounds absolutely crazy to me, what is that about? What is that? I don't need to debate. I don't need to defend this. I'm the smartest person.
Well, that's what they've been told. I mean, that's the defense mechanism for people who are raising doubts and questions, and it's kind of a deflection and a projection outward that it's your problem. And that's why, a major technique that I tell my clients, people who are trying to help a family member or a friend, is you're going to get much better by building rapport and trust on common ground issues that they agree with and you agree with, and to take a position of curiosity and respect. Hey, you're a smart person. Help me step into your shoes. Like, go back in time and tell me when you first believed the earth was flat, and explain to me, because if it's true, I'll believe it. If that's the frame that there's potential to actually shift something, but not an attack and saying, come on, that's stupid. How could you believe that BS? It's so ridiculous to think that Q exists or whatever.
Yeah.
That doesn't work.
Yeah, that's usually my technique. And
doesn't work. So learn by experience. If it doesn't work, stop doing it. Do something different.
It's not remotely effective, I found. But
well, it drives them deeper into it, is what it does, and it persuades them that they're being persecuted, because they correctly say, we, meaning those against Trump and against conspiracy, are in the majority, right? We own the media. They're the persecuted minority, right? So that you don't want to reinforce that and say, you're the minority, and everybody out here who's awake knows.
What I've said to one person in particular in arguing with her is, and I know you're going to tell me that I've now made the problem worse, and I will be open to that. But I've said your beliefs are a danger to our community. You're dangerous. Those beliefs are dangerous, and therefore your promotion of them are dangerous. That's not going to work, huh?
So what is absolutely
I'm talking about the
crucial,
anti-vax person, by the way.
So that's a whole thing. We should do a whole show on that. What is the essence of all good communications training, in my opinion, and I've been to a million trainers because I'm a trainer myself and I want to know what people are explaining. But one of the crucial things that I learned back in the early 80s was that everyone constructs a model of reality that's uniquely them. And instead of trying to take yours and assume everyone's like you have to start with, they're completely different than me. Let me figure out how they're constructing reality. What are their core beliefs? What are their core values?
Yes.
And enter into that mindset. And because I was in a cult, it's helped me step into all kinds of different cult things, even though they were completely different beliefs. But I can, in my mind, imagine whoever in front of me and do scenarios of what I think would actually improve rapport and trust, gather, valuable information, or what actually might plant a seed or invoke a different perspective on it. So, for example, if I ask someone to go back in time before they met the Moonies, for example, or before they met Scientology, did you ever hear of Scientology or the Moonies? Oh yeah. What did you think of them? Oh, I thought they were a cult. Oh, that's interesting. So now you're going back to their neuronal structures of where they knew it was a cult. And then you have them walk. So what was it that started getting you to think differently? And in that storytelling, it actually will make unconscious manipulation tactics and deceptions that got people to make contracts and commitments like Landmark Forum to things that no contract is acceptable if you didn't have informed consent and understand what is the belief system and what are the techniques that are going to be done on me to be in these group settings, etc. So getting people back in time and giving them tools for reality testing. And the biggest question, and I do this with my other mental health clients, is I say, if you knew then what you know now, would you do the same thing? Like, would you go to that first Mooney meeting for the free dinner if you knew they were bowing to an altar in front of a Korean misogynistic product of the Korean CIA? No one would say yes. They go. So if you know you wouldn't have done it then, why are you still there? Oh, all my friends are here. Oh, okay. So in other words, truth doesn't really matter. And you keep thinking about it.
Last question. Have you ever, in any media outlet on tape, had a conversation with somebody who is we consider a cult member? Like, done what you do publicly? Have you done that? Or
so that's a very interesting question. And the answer is, as a mental health professional, I can never do that. I've been asked by reality show producers to, please, Steve, we want to film interventions and we want to get you in a room.
Yeah.
And it's just like, how can I honor the person in front of me and put them first, thinking about ratings, thinking about the executive producer and all of that? It's what's known as an ethical conflict. So I've said no to that. I did do one thing that's on my YouTube channel. There was an ex-member of a guru cult, Jim Heller. He's a trial attorney who's a Trumper. And he said, I want to challenge you to a debate. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't want to debate, but I'll talk with you. And so we did this thing. I did my best, but he was like a trial attorney trying to disrupt the expert witness. And he did a pretty good job of rattling me.
I want to, I mean, a lot of them are very good at that. I'm going to definitely watch that.
In fairness, I put it up.
Yep.
I honored, because I want people to learn. And the thing is I'm willing to go to all kinds of lengths to explain my stuff, but I also don't want to be abused.
I understand, which is why, you don't go on Tucker Carlson or shows like that.
Oh, I would love to go on Tucker Carlson.
Don't, because
or Sean Hannity.
They won't let you talk. They won't let you talk.
My publisher, Simon and Schuster, sent more books to Fox than they sent to everywhere else.
I think they could edit you and not let you talk in a way that would just not allow your expertise to resonate with their audience, unfortunately. That
was one of the things that my publicist at Simon and Schuster said.
Yeah.
But I that's who needs to hear my stuff the most.
No doubt about it, and they won't on that platform because they won't be allowed for, in my opinion. I'd love to be wrong about that. All right, thank you. Part 3, I hope soon. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, Stephen.
Pleasure. Take care.
All right.
Thanks for having me on.
There you go, Stephen Hassan. And part 3 will air tomorrow, but follow him right now at Cult Expert on Twitter. Get his books. freedomofmind.com is his website. Learn more about him there and get all of his books, including most recently The Cult of Trump. A leading cult expert explains how the president uses mind control. I don't think he knows that he's doing that, but he does. Stephen Hassan, so much fun, really interesting and enlightening. I hope you appreciated that, and I hope you will listen to our third conversation, which I will post for tomorrow's podcast. But right now, I want to bring you my conversation with Eric Segall. He is a professor of constitutional law at Georgia State University down in Atlanta. He's also the author of 2 awesome books, Supreme Myths and Originalism as Faith. He had a lot to say about the landmark decision on LGBT rights as well as the gun case. We talked about that and got off on a couple of good, interesting tangents as well. He is on Twitter at eSpinSegall, and here is our conversation. During the month of June, the Supreme Court announces their decisions on cases that were argued that they heard throughout the term earlier, and the announcements come on Monday and Thursday, which is why I have Professor Eric Segall on retainer for Tuesday and Friday for this podcast. We're always happy when he joins us, and oh, what a day it was at the court yesterday. Professor Eric Segall is here now. It was a sensational day for progressives that we didn't expect to have. Is that fair to say?
It was a great day for progressives. No, I expected this. I predicted this outcome, though nobody was sure it was going to be a close call. But I predicted this outcome.
Points for you.
Yeah. Well, the Supreme Court held that the federal.
You have to make it seem like we're taping it today.
I know, I keep forgetting. Okay,
it's okay.
Right.
They know.
Yesterday. Today. Fuck. When are we taping? Right? When the fuck are we taping?
We taped this last year. What's wrong with you? We're in the future. We're actually in the future. Can you tell us if Trump gets reelected or not?
This is for tomorrow's podcast. So
this is the best moment we will have during this conversation, folks. So soak it up.
You can't air this. No, there's no airing of this.
It's airing, dude.
There's absolutely
yes.
no airing.
Say hi to all of the people who love you so much.
This is my 3rd radio show. Today I've given 2 quotes. I don't know who I'm talking to you, to who. I don't know what's happening.
It's me, Pete Dominic. We're like best friends.
Okay. So on Monday, June, whatever the fuck it was, the
14th,
the Supreme Court 15th. Of the United States decided that a law passed by Congress that prohibits discrimination based on sex, commonly referred to as Title VII. This is the National Employment Discrimination Law that protects women and people of color and against national origin discrimination. Did this law also give protections to gays and lesbians and people who are transgender? And the lower courts had been split on this. Different courts had reached different decisions. And the Supreme Court held that, in fact, Title VII does protect gays and lesbians when they are fired because of their sexual orientation. I think it is the correct decision, but it is not the only decision the court could have reached. There are plausible ways to go either way on this case, and it's a much harder case than most liberals would have you believe.
Oh, really? It's a much harder case. I mean, the Civil Rights Act 1964, this is Title V. It forbids employment.
Seven.
What?
Title VII.
That's what I said. I know how to read Roman. I know how to. People heard what I said. I said it right. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which forbids employment. I said as amended. which forbids employment discrimination that occurs, quote, because of an employee's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Why wouldn't that be a slam dunk to protect gender, sexual orientation, rather?
Well, because, for example,
sexual orientation.
In one of the cases today that was decided, there was a guy from Georgia, my great state, who was a skydiver helper or something. He helped people skydive. And when he announced he was gay, he was fired by his employer.
You don't want to fly tandem with a gay guy.
That's in fact what the employer thought his customers.
Oh God, can you imagine?
I know,
can you imagine? Then women could never fly with men, of course.
Yes, of course. Listen. So what Kavanaugh and Alito said today in dissent.
Can you imagine being sexually aroused while jumping from a plane? Like, I would think that would be the very last.
Depends who I'm jumping with.
No, there's been studies. It's actually impossible to maintain an erection while skydiving because you're so terrified of dying that you just can't think about sex. But that's my expertise.
So this guy was fired because he was gay. And Kavanaugh and Thomas and Alito did say he wasn't fired because of his sex. He was fired because of his sexual orientation, and those are two different things. The reason I think that argument is not persuasive, the reason Justice Gorsuch, on behalf of 4 liberals and Justice Roberts, rejected that argument, is because you can fire.
He's skydived before, and he knows that I'm right. That's why.
Let me get through this.
All right.
Because it's hard to make this understandable.
I'm so sorry. Everybody's mad at me now.
Okay. You can fire someone for 2 reasons, or 3 reasons, or 6 reasons. And this guy was fired actually for 2 reasons. He was fired because he was gay, and he was fired because he was a man who was sexually identified as being sexually interested in other men. If he were a woman, he would not have been fired. In other words, if he had said, I want to date women, he keeps his job. I want to date men, he loses his job. That's discrimination based on sex. It is also discrimination based on sexual orientation. We can hold both. Let me give I have a slam dunk example.
Okay.
Back in the day, there was some case involving women and men and insurance policies in some way, and women live longer than men. So employers said, we're going to treat women differently for the purposes of this job benefit than men, not because they're women, but because they live longer.
Right.
And let's believe that guy. Like, that employer may have been telling the truth. He didn't care if they were women or not. He cared they lived longer. But he was still treating women differently than men, which meant he was making a discrimination based on sex, which meant he was violating Title VII. And the same thing, I think, is true today. But here's what makes it really hard, and let no one tell you it's not really hard. When this law was passed, nobody thought it meant this. Nobody. Not a single person on the planet.
Nobody thought it meant, when this law was passed in 1964, no one thought it meant protecting gay people, which at that point they thought was...
Yes, or even when it was amended in 72. No one thought. Mm-hmm. In fact, Pete, no one thought it meant this in 1990, much less 1972. So
no one ever thought it protected people based on...
sexual orientation.
Orientation.
That's right. So, but that's not unusual. And we can close the loop right here. There's something called the Sherman Antitrust Act. It prohibits price fixing and restraint of trade. It is a very short statute passed in the 1890s. And it basically says restraints of trade are illegal. The problem is restraints of trade is not a self-defining term. If we had to define that today, what restraint of trade means today, we're not going to just stick with the meaning in 1890. We're going to take our modern sensibilities and our modern ideas and figure out what restraint of trade means. The same is true of because of sex. That's the statutory language. Because of sex. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense to me because because that's the way that I think, but it's not necessarily the way the, quote, originalist who decides his, I want to say his mostly, but her decision based on text and originalism, in which case this is why there was some surprise that Gorsuch, who refers to himself as a textualist, wrote
sided with the majority, the liberals, for protection of gay people, and wrote the majority opinion, which says something even more about it. How can he maintain that he is an originalist and that this was his interpretation?
Okay, so I can answer that question, Pete. You've known me now more than 10 years, but I cannot give you a 1-minute answer. To give you an honest answer.
I asked for a 1-minute answer for this one specifically before the interview.
Justice Gorsuch would say that he is an originalist in the sense that he tries to figure out what the original meaning of the words were at the time, which he would say is different than what people expected those words to mean. So this gets very scholarly and kind of academic, but it's not that complicated. What Gorsuch would say is I'm bound by the meaning of the words, but not the application of those words to new facts or new situations. Now, you and I know that's a piece of shit. That's a crock. All that does is allow someone to be a non-originalist while claiming to be an originalist. But that's what,
the whole thing is convoluted. And
yes, that's what Scalia and Thomas, that's what they all do. So, for example, Pete, and when we talk about constitutional law, we all agree on freedom of speech, right? Most of us. We all agree freedom of speech is a good thing. But when we have to apply freedom of speech to very hard questions of defamation or hate speech or fighting words or threats or libel or whatever, all we have is a vague idea of freedom of speech. Judges have to construct the rules implementing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's how Scalia worked, and that's how Brennan worked, and that's how Kagan works. They all work that way. So at the end of the day, what it means is judges have to judge, and they have to choose. And the judges today had two choices. They could have said, which they did, 6 of them said, because of sex in 2020 obviously means, like you said 10 minutes ago, when you're fired because of your sexual orientation, you're fired because of your sex. Or they could have said, if Congress meant sexual orientation, they would have said sexual orientation. They didn't. They said sex. Either one of those two glosses on the text are permissible. As a policy matter, of course, I would hope, you and I agree, as should most Americans, that gays and lesbians should get the protections of a statute that prohibits discrimination based on sex.
Yeah. I mean, it would seem it's an immutable characteristic, and that's why it's important that we talk about discrimination as it relates to people based on how they were born. We talk right now about discrimination against cops. That's a job. Chose that job. We even allow for religion, which is a choice, but we allow for that to be a protected class, don't we?
You and I say that it's immutable, but I don't think we can say that everyone everywhere agrees to that. I think they're wrong, but that's not the point. The point is we have a federal statute that prohibits discrimination based on sex. Now, I'm a boss, and I walk into my employee's office, and I say, "Hi, Jim, what are you doing tonight?" And he says, "I'm going on a date with Julie." And we say, "Good, have fun." Now he says, "I'm going on a date with Bob." And we say, "You're fired." If he were a woman, I wouldn't fire him. Therefore, I'm making a distinction based on sex.
I would say, do you have any friends that are interesting with interesting, unique names that you could date?
So one of the reasons that you and I are a little bit less disciplined today than we are in our normal erudite discussions is, well, I'll tell you why I'm being a little bit less serious than usual. Because this was a really good day. Because it was a good day for tens of millions of gays and lesbians and transgendered people. And it was a good day involving some gun stuff we'll talk about in a minute. The thing is, Pete, enjoy it. This is our last good day this term.
Because there are other decisions that are coming that...
Yes, there are disasters to come. So that's right. We're making a little fun today.
Bottom line is now you can't fire someone for being, if they're gay.
Well,
anywhere in the country, and if you do, you're going to be in big trouble.
Well, you have to have more than a certain number of employees, to meet the statute requirements and that. But what's coming down the pike, and what Gorsuch specifically took out of the opinion today, was we don't know what's going to happen with religious employers who claim that they can hire and fire people because their religion makes them not want to work with homosexuals and gays and lesbians. That's going to be a case. That's going to be a disaster, and that's coming. But we're at least a year away from that problem, I think. So.
Can't we just give those people their own country? Let's call it Mississippi.
Don't start talking to me about evangelicals. You have to have a woman named Sarah Posner on your show. She just wrote a book, the scariest book I've read in 10 years, on how the evangelical right has captured the Trump administration in a way no other administration has done. I've been tweeting about her book for 2 weeks. Have her on, Sarah Posner.
I will have her on. Have you heard about Catherine Stewart's book? Sounds similar. The Power Worshippers Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism.
Yeah, well, yes, I have. What scared me about you and I and Mike Dorff, in fact, talked about evangelicals and abortion and all that stuff, a month ago or so.
Yeah.
Here's what I learned from this book, Pete, that is so important that I didn't know. What I didn't know, Pete, and we're far afield from the Supreme Court now, but actually not too far afield. What I didn't know was starting in 2010, 11, 12, the Franklin Grahams of the world and the evangelical leaders and that woman White, who is now in the White House, running.
Paula White.
Yeah,
she's great.
These groups, who I always thought and knew were aligned with, conservative Republicans on abortion and on same-sex marriage and things, they started embracing these right-wing totalitarian leaders in other countries, like Putin, like the guy in Brazil, like the guy in Hungary. And the reason they started doing that is because these totalitarian leaders Putin passed an incredibly horrific anti-gay lesbian directive in 2013. And these folks love that. And they are, as we sit here, working in conjunction with these right-wing totalitarian leaders abroad to basically, what they don't care about democracy and they don't care about freedom. They care about theocracy.
That's exactly the sentence I had in my mind that I was going to say. Their concern is not democracy or all of the rights we have come to know and argue about in the United States Constitution. Their aim, and they've done a pretty good job at acquiring enough power to get their American Taliban going.
Well, and here's the difference between Trump and Reagan and the second Bush. Both Reagan and the second Bush talk the talk of evangelical and all that stuff. And they had allies, and Jerry Falwell visited the White House and all that stuff. But here's what neither Reagan nor the second Bush did. They didn't transform the executive branch into one big evangelical church. And that's what Trump has done. So he has brought into the Department of Health and Human Services all of these nuts, these religious wacko nuts whose only agenda is basically, a theocracy involving women staying barefoot and pregnant and anti-gay rights and anti-immigration people. Like everything else in America.
Tons of racism within all that. We should always. Yeah.
And that's the other reason. Bill Maher made a joke about this maybe 2 years ago, and I kind of dismissed it. But now I see that he was right. One of the reasons the Republican Party has embraced Putin over the last 3 years, something you never thought they ever would have done, was because Russia is white. And I really believe that's true. And the way this relates to the Supreme Court, of course, is all of these people, their agenda here is twofold. It is to allow people to come to power in America whose priorities are anti-immigration, anti-gay rights, anti-abortion, and to capture the Supreme Court. And that's what makes today's case kind of interesting. Because
they did not get their agenda that they put these guys in place for. It's not unlike, I want to say, Sandra Day O'Connor on abortion. Reagan appointed her, and she did not decide the way that they thought. And so they're just not, it's a bridge too far. In this case, discriminated against gays. We've got a big abortion case coming up, however. Yes. And we can talk about the evangelical power in Washington in this administration. And the only thing I would add to what you're saying is that isn't it fascinating? And I wonder how accurate this is of history's authoritarians, that they don't actually believe the bullshit they're selling.
I know.
I mean, Trump's not an evangelical. He has no interest in any of it. And he disdains it. I'm sure he's disgusted by all of it. He can't stand any of it outside of the qualities that lead to worshiping a person, in this case, him.
This book by Sarah Posner called Unholy has, dozens of quotes where she interviewed evangelical leaders. And almost all of them said the same thing. We know Trump doesn't believe this. We don't care.
Right.
And they would cite passages from the Bible, which I can't repeat to you right now, about how when God sends you his messenger, don't worry if it's not the perfect person or whatever. But more importantly, what they love about Trump is his strong man tactics, which they distinguish from Bush and Reagan. In their view, Bush and Reagan talked the talk but didn't walk the walk. Trump is actually walking the walk.
Right.
That's what makes him so, because he doesn't care, obviously. He doesn't.
All right. Well, before we let you go, I don't know if we'll have time. Do we have time for abortions and guns, which is a hilarious sentence, all of it. But there's a major case decided also today by the Supreme Court, which declined to hear 10 Second Amendment cases, leaving in place restrictions on assault weapons, concealed carry licensing, Eric, and other life-saving gun laws nationwide. This is a win for public safety and a loss for the NRA, according to Gabrielle Gifford's organization at Gifford's Courage. And across the board, my friend Igor Volsky's Guns Down America, Moms Demand, all the gun control, if you will, regulate the guns organizations like this decision. What happened today?
Well, it wasn't a decision.
This?
It was 10 decisions not to hear cases from lower courts. There is a really, really big issue all across the country now, Pete, about whether you're allowed to, whether Americans have a constitutional right to have a gun in public, or whether carrying a gun in public, or numerous states have laws that say to have a gun in public, you have to show a special need, that you've been specifically targeted for some kind of violent harassment or something. And the Supreme Court has only issued 2 real gun cases, in the last 20 years. One said that D.C. could not ban all handguns, and one said Chicago couldn't ban all handguns. And it's left the rest of it to the lower courts. What Adam Winkler has said on your show on at least 2 occasions with me, Adam Winkler is one of the leading gun experts in the United States. He and I agreed that the reason the Supreme Court has not taken any other gun cases was because no one knew how Justice Kennedy was going to vote. So the 4 liberals didn't know if he was going to vote with them, and the 4 conservatives didn't know if he was going to vote for them, so they just didn't take a bunch of cases. Kennedy is gone now, and Kavanaugh is clearly a huge Second Amendment guy. So what the scuttlebutt is today among court watchers is now Justice Roberts is the one whose vote people aren't sure about on either side. And Pete, I think that's probably accurate. I think the last thing Justice Roberts wants this year or next year is a headline: Supreme Court strikes down assault weapon ban, or Supreme Court strikes down, open carry rules. I think he doesn't want that. I don't think the Second Amendment is a huge issue for him. He hasn't written separately on the question. He joined the other 2 decisions. And this is great because lower courts are mostly upholding these laws, as they should. And I would like the Supreme Court to stay out of it until our children have children.
This is a setback for the gun rights people, the gun people, according to Adam Winkler and according to all these organizations that I mentioned earlier.
I think that's right, and I think it is, and I'm glad.
Okay.
Now, what all of this might be leading up to is a absolutely earthquake of an abortion decision sometime between now and June 30th.
Which you have no doubt about that outcome?
No, I think there's only 2 possibilities. One is they will gut the controlling cases, Roe versus Wade and Casey, and effectively allow the states to regulate abortion out of existence, or they'll overturn them altogether without the effectively part of that. Which one of those 2 things they're going to do? I don't think they're going to overturn it altogether, but I hope they do, as you and I discussed with Mike Dorf a month ago. Rather than destroy the case law, I'd rather than overturn the case law and be honest about it.
because you think about what the political outcome of that would be.
Yeah,
the backlash.
By the way, speaking of that, today's opinion really helps Trump get reelected, just so you know.
Any opinion that goes against a conservative or a progressive creates momentum.
But not any opinion, but opinions about guns, gay rights, religion, and abortion. Yes.
Yeah, but you're not saying
no,
that
still the right
you'd
thing
have
to
it.
do. No, still the right thing to do. Yeah, no question. Pete, honestly, and let's be just dead serious for 30 seconds. Today is a great day for America in the same way that Oberger fell and when it was a great day for America. Gays and lesbians were given equal rights today, and that's a good thing.
Right, and this gun case as well, I would argue.
Yeah, but that could change next week. I mean, that's not – this today is permanent. That may or may not be permanent.
There were other decisions as well that we're not going to get to,
no.
But people should look into them and learn about them, because how would you articulate why elections matter and have consequences, and why these decisions are so important based on the makeup of the court, the Supreme Court's decision? Right.
Well, we had two, in addition to abortion and DACA, we also had Trump's tax returns cases coming down between now and the end of June, and those really could decide an election, right? I mean, if somehow Trump's financial documents could become public before November, you and I both know what's going to be in those documents, and it's not going to be helpful to him. So that's a very, very big case.
Is that a decision? Yeah, so that's a decision, Trump's taxes, basically, that we're going to be hearing this month.
Yes, with one caveat. In the past, every year you and I have done this every June for the last 10 years. The last day of decision is almost always the last day of June. But this year they went later because of the COVID. So, we don't know. They don't announce exactly when the last day is going to be. So we don't know for sure. Usually it's the last day of June, but like everything else in our world, it could be different this year.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, as always, for your time, buddy. I appreciate this really important decisions at the Supreme Court yesterday. When did they happen?
I love you more today than yesterday.
Eric Segall, everybody. Thank you, sir. Isn't he always great? Aren't we always great together? I appreciate you loving Eric Segall as much as I do. On Twitter at eSpinSegall. Tell him you heard him here and that you enjoyed that. That was fun. We always have a good time, and this was a good day, I think, for equality and for safety and for justice, one might argue. Huge black trans protest over the weekend, and then seeing this kind of action, not necessarily as a result of that, but you can connect those things in that movement, and I think that's just that's great. So now I want to get to my final guest of today's show, which is Michelangelo Signorile, who I have known for most of my career in radio, because we worked together at SiriusXM, where when I started, he was already a few years into hosting his own show. I've always thought of Mike as a civil rights hero himself. He was in the forefront of getting Don't Ask, Don't Tell repealed, as well as marriage equality and everything else. He is a really good guy who has become a good friend and mentor to me over my career and my life over the past 10 years. You can hear him every single day on SiriusXM. He is on 3 to 6 Eastern. That's channel 127. He's on Twitter at Michelangelo Signorile, and I'm really happy I was able to catch up with him last night. Here is our conversation, where we start with a little bit about politics and the pandemic and New York, and then we get to the landmark LGBT case, as well as a few others. Here it is right now. Michelangelo Signorile, one of my all-time favorite human beings, and always a great person to be in conversation with. It's great to get you back on the podcast. It's been far too long. Hey, pal. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks. Yeah, great to speak with you, Pete.
How have you survived? I haven't talked to you in far too long. You're a person I hold in great regard, and I feel bad that we haven't spoken, and I'm really glad to get you back on the show today. But how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I mean, I live in Manhattan, and it was a bit crazy through that deepest, darkest part of the epidemic, as being in the epicenter, doing my radio show from home every day, and just really worried about what was going on everywhere, and worried about neighbors, and worried about just even the people working, as essential workers who would deliver stuff. I mean, it was such a terrible time, so things are feeling a little better now. And, even as the rest of the country looks like it's going to be exploding. It feels a little better in New York.
Was it weird or was it unique to be doing a national radio show from the kind of ground zero of the epidemic?
It was all very creepy and anxiety producing and no sleep at all. And, going to bed very late, getting up early, having that sort of feeling in the morning of, for 5 seconds, like it was normal. And then it felt like the day after Trump's election, like, oh my God, we're in real hell right now. So, it was a crazy time. And then it just went right into the protests, and I was on the air while protests went by my my apartment building. So it's been a crazy time.
What do you think is the most egregious irresponsibility or lack of leadership for Trump during the pandemic? I mean, I'm sure you talked about it every single day on your show. How do you think he got it so wrong? How has he been so inept? He and his administration, frankly, throughout the epidemic. What do you think's been the worst part for him?
I think the worst part was the lack of testing. If they had just, from the beginning, very candidly said, look, our problem is testing. Here's the reason why. Here's what we're going to do. We have to make sure everybody gets tested. We have to make sure the states get tested. I think that would have made 100% difference. Even with the problem with ventilators and hospitals overrun, all of that, I still think the testing, rolling out the testing, would have helped enormously. It would have just given a roadmap to how governors could operate, and it would have just helped in every other area. And I think it would have helped him politically, and I think it's what damaged him so badly.
Did you see what he said today when he said, we could just not have any tests and we wouldn't have any cases?
Right. Well, we don't need death reports either.
It's crazy. Yeah. So do you think that his handling of the mishandling of the pandemic hurt him politically to the point where it did real permanent damage to his incumbency, to his reelection?
Yes, I think the biggest damage has been among the people who have been most horrifically affected by the pandemic, which are senior citizens who, of course, had a much higher rate of mortality. We've seen him lose in all of these polls that we're seeing senior citizens to Joe Biden by quite a large margin, and I'm not sure how much of that comes back. I think people really see him as viewing them as expendable, and I think that's hurt him. I think religious conservatives, we've seen the polls drop, and he doesn't understand. Standing in front of a church with a Bible after gassing people is not going to bring them back. They too happen to be largely older people, and they are not happy with how he's handled the pandemic. So he just doesn't seem to get why people are unhappy with him.
Do you try to ever convince the Trump supporters? Do you engage them on your show or on social media or anywhere else? Do you try to reason with them and in hopes that maybe you can help them see the light?
I speak to at least one or two Trump supporters every single weekday on my program. And I am 90% of the time having knockdown, drag out fights with them, and it ends badly for them. And they scamper away, and it's, a knockout. What's been interesting about the past, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks is there are less of them calling, and I'm actually getting converts when they do call. I had one guy who even defended the police in their actions in recent weeks, but has jumped off the Trump train because of the Bible photo op and the gassing of the protesters.
That really was a deal breaker.
That event really affected some of his supporters. I don't know how many. I'm just going by, anecdotally. But these are people, a couple of them are hardcore Trump supporters who are like Trumpers. Yeah. They're hardcore. They've been calling my show for years, and they still disagree with me on everything else, but they say they just cannot vote for him.
Have you found any kind of overlaps with a large percentage of the Trump supporters believing in this QAnon stuff and everybody's a pedophiles, deep state, Democratic, establishment are pedophiles and QAnon, all that stuff? Because I feel like that's not, I don't have any data on this, but I feel like it's not just a fringe of even Trump supporters. I feel like it's a lot of them.
It seeps in, and I don't even know if they realize it. I will recognize it sometimes before they even do. Like, oh, that sounds like a QAnon theory. The QAnon stuff and all that other conspiracy stuff has seeped into the basic Trump supporter ideology where they don't even know where it's coming from.
Yeah. I feel like that the most disconcerting part of it is that they're not going to, if there is a vaccine, they're not going to get it. They don't trust it because of all these crazy conspiracy theories.
Right. And look at how they're signing up to go to his rally in Tulsa. And they're okay with signing a disclaimer. Like they'll get COVID. They don't care.
Just nuts. So imagine putting yourself in, like, what live performance, Mike, like band or comedian or I know you're big into magic. What live performance would you even think about going to? There's nothing. There's no artist. There's no Broadway show. There's no concert that you would consider going to that much. But yet these guys are going to a Trump rally. Like if the Beatles came back and said one night only, all of the Beatles, you'd be like, I'm going to watch it from home.
Right. No, sorry. I mean, maybe if I was in a spacesuit, but no. 19,000 people in an arena, and apparently they're going to be given hand sanitizer and masks. Will they wear them? I don't know. No, I wouldn't be going there.
All right. Well, I wanted to also, of course, ask you about this decision at the Supreme Court today, and it's a really important decision, and it matters a lot for a lot of reasons. I guess I was kind of surprised to see this decision. Maybe I wasn't paying attention, but you've been covering this, and I wanted to get your perspective from it on a human level in terms of what this means. But the Supreme Court landmark decision today on LGBTQ rights, which says that because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it covers gay folks from being persecuted at their job. You can't fire people because of their sexual orientation. Do I have it right there?
That's right. It says that the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Title VII, which says that you can't fire people on a number of categories, race, ethnicity, religion, and sex, includes gay and transgender people because the court's interpretation is that sex includes sexual orientation and gender identity. And it's massive in the sense that it not only protects people in employment, but it also will be used in cases now about housing and public accommodations and lots of other areas. It will be brought forth back to the court because Gorsuch was very clear that anywhere where the word sex is used includes sexual orientation and gender identity. I wasn't surprised because I had followed this and from the beginning and even before it got to the court, but also Gorsuch's legal theory, which is, he's a textualist and it's in his book. And the way he was asking the questions, you sort of knew that he realized this was a real test of his legal theory. And he even said during the oral arguments, like, maybe this is an exception to my theory because it'll cause massive upheaval. I mean, he actually said that. But he said, his theory is basically that if something is written, a statute is written as the text, it has to be, you can't try to interpret what they meant at the time. They certainly didn't mean, he even admits, they certainly didn't mean transgender and gay people. They meant sex meaning women,
Gender.
and men, gender. But he said it doesn't matter. His theory is, his legal theory is that whatever the text says is what matters. It doesn't matter what it was intended to mean. And so if you are discriminated against because you are gay, you are discriminated against based on sex, because if you were a woman who had sex with men, you wouldn't be fired. But if you're a man who has sex with men, you would be fired.
And if you're a woman who has sex with women, you'd be promoted.
Yes.
Because there's a double standard.
So I kind of wasn't, let's put it this way. I thought because other conservatives have had, they have their textualist theories and all their legal theories, and then they always are hypocrites, right. And they have an exception like Scalia and others. So I wouldn't have been surprised if he didn't do it, because he would have just been another hypocrite, but I wasn't surprised that he did. He was just being consistent. But the other thing about it that really needs to be pointed out is how the Obama administration really laid the groundwork for this, because the LGBT community really wasn't going way back, like moving on this path, just as they weren't really moving on a path with marriage equality. They've been moving to try to get legislation passed that would protect people against discrimination in employment and other areas. It wasn't until during the Obama era, at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Obama had appointed some gay and lesbian legal scholars to the EEOC, and this was kind of an esoteric theory, the idea that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 protected you on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. The EEOC just kept hearing cases and sort of, broadened this out and got it more accepted into the traditional courts, because the EEOC is sort of like a quasi-court. And so they kind of mainstreamed the whole idea. So it's sort of like between Obama and then Gorsuch's, textualist theory, this happened. And I think that needs to be acknowledged. That and what else needs to be acknowledged is that Gorsuch is not going to be, I believe, some future friend for LGBT people. I think this was about his theory. He's a religious liberty fanatic. He supported Hobby Lobby decision. He actually handed down that decision before it got to the Supreme Court when he was on the appeals court.
Remind us what that decision was, because I thought that was about employment.
Well, that was about allowing Hobby Lobby, the arts and crafts chain, to deny women who work for them health care if it provided for birth control. And that was based on their religious belief. They could deny employees coverage for birth control. And he's about religious exemptions. So nobody should be shocked if a year from now he actually says there can be a religious exemption to this. Do you know what I mean? Because none of these employers in these three cases argued that they fired the person because of their religious belief. So that would have maybe caused a different outcome. But, he even acknowledged it. He said there may sometime be a religious exemption, but there wasn't in this case.
How real was the issue of people who identify as LGBTQ being fired from their jobs? How much of an issue was it?
Well, there have been a lot of different studies, and one that I was just reading a week ago that had come out said that about 43% of LGBT people have at some point experienced discrimination, whether it was the perception that they weren't hired for that reason, whether it was the reality that they were fired and they were told that that was the reason why. And there are so many different stories, they're in the media all the time. I was just, in fact, contacted by a man maybe about 2 months ago who had said that he, it was right before actually the pandemic, so maybe more like three or 4 months ago, he was working for a company that translates Bibles, and he's gay and he's a Christian, and he got the job and they loved him and he liked the job, and then he got married and he went to HR to get his husband on his health insurance, and that triggered some sort of meeting where they told him, we don't support we're a religious organization, we don't support your being gay, and therefore you're going to have to leave. So it happens all the time to people, or at least it did, and now this will hopefully stop it.
What else is out there right now in terms of legal persecution of LGBT Americans? I think it's always important to remind people that this civil rights fight is not over. As well, I want to ask you about Black Lives Matter, but what else is there for freedoms and equality for LGBT? We did Don't Ask, Don't Tell. You and I talked about that over and over. And then, of course, marriage and equality, and now employment persecution. And we can talk about religious freedoms and so on. I mean, the fight never stops. I realize that you can never, ever give up. You can never give up any ground on your equality. But what else is on the still remains?
Well, adoption and surrogacy rights have been a huge issue, and there are so many cases, and agencies that want to discriminate and yet get government money and want to prefer heterosexual households, or this happens all the time and is still happening. Housing, people are thrown out of their apartments because a landlord doesn't like that they're gay or transgender. That happens all the time. Public accommodations is, of course, the big one, where people are told they can't, they have to get out of this restaurant, or they don't serve these people at this hotel. I think there was a bed and breakfast in Hawaii that said, sorry, we don't allow gay couples. I mean, this happens all the time. People go into a business, they're thrown out. And that's one where I think the religious liberty argument will be used quite a bit. And that's where I think Gorsuch would be more sympathetic to the owners, and that's what we have to worry about.
I wanted to ask you before I got to let you go here, what you think about the election, which is, 140-some days away. What do you think of Joe Biden's candidacy and how he's been running the election during this crazy time where you really just can't campaign in any traditional way? What do you think of him as a candidate, and what do you think of how he's handling this?
I think that he has done probably the best you can do in a time like this, in terms of not being able to traditionally campaign. And, for all of the worries about Joe Biden early in the primary process, he's been very open to what a lot of other people are suggesting and wanting, and bringing people in. And, they've created these task forces with Bernie Sanders and his supporters. He seems really to be working a lot with Elizabeth Warren, with Kamala Harris. I mean, he really seems to understand, or at least the people behind him seem to understand, that this is much bigger than him. And I think it really is. I think people are very, very unified at making sure we get rid of Donald Trump. And I think that's why we've also seen Joe Biden just tick up, in those polls more and more as Trump continues to fail, more and more people are getting behind Biden, and we haven't really seen anything that has really hurt him in the last few months, even as Trump has tried in every way. So it's 4.5 months. I hope it continues that way.
Do you still see a big divide in the progressive movement and the Democratic Party between those who are, quote, more progressive? I think pragmatism is the word, because I don't think it's about how your politics or where you stand on policy. I think it's just kind of winning or losing. But I still want to frame it one way so people can understand it. Are you still seeing that divide between the kind of the Bernie bros, if you will, for lack of a better phrase?
I think what happened in a way is that they split. There were those who said, oh, okay, I can never get aboard this. And then there are those who've said, okay, we have to use Joe Biden to the best of our advantage. And I think you're seeing that quite a bit. And in terms of numbers, I don't know that, those who just can't get aboard are really going to make any difference. And I think we're probably seeing more unity than we even saw after the battle between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. So I don't think that's really going to be a big issue.
I so appreciate you talking to me tonight. It's great to hear your voice and talk to you. We got to do this more often. I always love getting your insights on things. Mike, thanks so much. I'm glad to hear your voice, and I'm glad to hear you're doing well.
Thank you, Pete. Great to speak with you.
Talk to you again soon, pal. All right, there it is, Stephen Hassan, and part 3 of our conversation will post tomorrow, as well as Professor Eric Segall and SiriusXM host and activist Michelangelo Signorile. Thank you, guys, all 3 of them. Follow them on Twitter, say hello to them, and thank you for listening today. I'm in your debt. I really appreciate all of your support. I love you. I miss you. I want to talk to you. So reach out to me if you haven't already. It was great to hear from my friend Amy out in, where does Amy live? She said that in her email to me that she believes me when I say at the end of the show, I love you. Said, I'm so grateful for you and your podcast. I believe you when you say I love you to your listeners. I believe that you truly care about your listeners and their struggles and their triumphs. Yeah, I do, because I think it's, of course, you support me and many of you, over 600 now with a paid subscription, and that means a lot to me. But I also feel like you bring a lot to my life, so much perspective and experience and ideas, and I talk to folks each and every day. And so I really do love you. I really love getting to know you. I've not even talked to so many of you, and I really want to. So, yeah, it is real, Amy, and it's authentic, and I appreciate it. And I am so grateful to you and everybody else. So Amy lives in Nebraska, as a matter of fact. That's where she lives. She grew up in California. But Amy, shout out to you. I really appreciate that email. Super thoughtful. And if you haven't emailed me, I'd love to hear more about you and your family and your life and how things are going. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Okay, you're not alone. You definitely aren't. And as we start to come out of this in different places and it gets worse in others, I think that I read 1,000 people a day are still dying in the United States of America. It is no small thing. These are all real lives. Watching comedian Lori Kilmartin live tweet the passing of her mother from COVID-19. It's heartbreaking, but I think it's also a really important and interesting thing that she is doing. Check her out at AnyLori16, by the way, and I'll get her on the podcast to talk about that at some point. Okay, that's it. I'm out of time. Done talking. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.